parts. He began inserting them into the circuit board as if he was running out of time. I could hear the sirens outside. Dad is Back by S.M. Dotson. This short story is based off a dream I had in 1993 or 1994. Dad died a month ago. He took 2 years to die from the cancer. He had traveled to the brink of death many times, only to return to have a normal conversation the next day. The reoccurrence became part of the rhythm of things. This repeated feat made it difficult to fully realize the absolute nature of his absence. For some reason, it sounded natural when the words came from my lips. Dad is back. Simple words, as if I called Mom to the television for the beginning of one of her shows. I heard the knock at the door, and I could see him in his suit outside the window. It looked as if he had come home in a drunken stupor and lost his keys. I opened the door and greeted him. There's not much time, he said. Let's go. What about Mom? She won't understand. We got in the car and I drove where he directed. He wanted to go to Radio Shack. I think they're closed now, I said. We can still get in, Dad said, with an urgency to his voice. Dad broke the window of the Radio Shack store with one of the many landscaping rocks, decorating the walkways around the parking lot. He went in and grabbed a naked circuit board. He began sorting through the resistors, capacitors, potentiometers, IC circuits, and other electric parts. He began inserting them into the circuit board as if he was running out of time. I could hear the sirens outside approach. We should get out of here before the police get here, I said. If I can put this together, I can talk to you from the other side. Don't you want to be able to talk to me? I didn't know it was possible. Of course I do, I replied. I crouched beside him as he put the device together. I stayed there until the police came. I was blinded by their flashlights, and then brought face down to the thin gray carpet. When I looked at my father, he lay lifeless on the ground. Police officers stood above his corpse. A female officer spoke into the microphone clipped to her shoulder. I think we found the missing body from Laurel Leaf Cemetery. Dad is Back by S.M. Dotson.
Along the Graveyard Lane by S.M. Dotson. Now available on Amazon. Exorcist Martin Salzburg speaks to the dead, discovers life after death, but becomes a heretic of his own faith in the process. In a race against time, tuberculosis could kill him before he learns how Seymour Downcross is keeping himself and his loyal followers alive since the 17th century. Along the Graveyard Lane. A quest for forbidden knowledge that will change the way you think about the afterlife.
And now I will turn the microphone over to Mr. Dodson so he can read his second and final 10-minute segment, excerpt from his novel, Along the Graveyard Lane, The Demonization of Ghosts, Soul Matter Series, Book 1. Steve, take it away.
Oh, thanks, Jim. This second reading is from Along the Graveyard Lane, and it takes place maybe around the middle of the novel, and explores further the idea of the communication with the dead and exorcist Martin Salzburg. So here we go. May 21st, 1867. Ghosts at peace resided in something like a deep sleep, their tiny light difficult to pry into responsiveness. Souls unaware of their own death or troubled by the nature of their demise were more accessible. They manifested near the dream realm during sleep and could be reached with help from a chemical medium, like twilight tea, or when the troubled soul possessed a child during the full moon, Toto Luna. Therefore, this was Martin's chance to speak to Helen, to find out the truth of her death and put her spirit at ease. The possessed child, Lily, her chronic violent possessions provided poignant evidence of Helen's purgatorial existence. Martin drank the bitter green herbal tea and found a comfortable position on the makeshift bed. She was easy to find in Twilight Tea Dream. Helen curled, head to knees, like Martin found her, as if the body still resided in the narrow shaft where she died. She mumbled and whimpered in the darkness, stuck in her last living memories. "Helen," he said. She did not respond. Martin spoke her name twice more. "Hello?" She peered up the old narrow shaft where she died. Ether mist formed the narrow walls from her memory, like dust particles that appeared in a band of light. "Helen, I have found you," Martin said. "Everything will be fine." "I'm hurt," Helen said between imaginary breath. "I'm going to lift you out." Helen moaned and clutched her stomach. "You'll be fine now." Martin placed a hand on her shoulder. "Try to relax." "I've been stabbed," Helen said between labored breaths. "I can't." "I'll see what I can do. Try to lie flat." "My own husband," Helen said. "He did this to me." Martin tried not to show alarm, but affected a consoling tone. "He can't hurt you now, but you'll be well in no time." "How could Johann do this to me?" Helen sobbed. The ethereal projection from her memory flickered and dimmed. In Helen's own mind, she was still injured, in pain and afraid. She curled into a ball and became non-responsive, stuck in a grim memory sequence. Delusion is a reality to the bodiless. Imagined pain made real. Helen held onto her physical and emotional wounds, the type of troubled soul who unknowingly tormented children during Toto Luna. In fact, she was Lily Laurette's so-called demon. But Helen was not demonic, only a confused murder victim caught in the moment of her own demise. May 26th, 1867. Martin drank twilight tea. The exorcist found Helen sitting on a chair, doubled over. "Hello, Helen. I see we've made progress." Helen lifted her head. Martin was taken aback at her beauty. He thought for a moment he dreamed of an imaginary woman, until she spoke. "I still hurt," Helen said. "Don't forget to straighten up so the scar tissue can break up." "But it hurts." "There'll be some pain, but it's healing fine." Helen straightened a half an inch and winced. Martin encouraged her. "It hurts now, but it'll get better." Helen attempted to straighten again with a pained face. "That's good. It's loosening the scar tissue. Feel it?" "Yes," Helen grimaced. Martin opened her robe.
and ran a finger over one of the scars. See, it's clearing up. The scar seemed to lighten. Imaginary healing cures delusional pain. Helen exhaled, a sigh of relief. She raised her hand onto Martin's shoulder for balance and straightened. "You are very warm, my God," she said. Soon after, she could stand with his support. "I'm getting better, Martin." Life seemed to return to her face, her eyes wide with excitement. Her long dark hair enhanced the black of her pupils. Her lips looked like the flesh of a bulbous strawberry, sliced and spread apart like butterflied pork chops. Moist and inviting. "I knew you could do it, Helen." The two locked eyes. Martin felt a rush of bliss move through his heart, as if a small hand of radiating heat had penetrated it. Helen clung to his warmth, for she had none of her own and gained more of herself in the embrace of his living aura. They kissed. Then they performed an act of passion between living soul and ghost, only to be found in folk legend and Gothic literature, but rare. If you can feel it, then it is real. End of excerpt. All right, James, take it over.
Did I just hear the meeting of, not to mind, but the meeting of a live person and a ghost?
Yes, you met a one of a kind meeting, and let's just say our protagonist didn't know it is possible because he's exploring a new frontier. But love can happen in strange places.
Did that idea come to you suddenly during the writing process, or was this something that you kind of knew was going to happen? It just was a matter of when it was going to take place and what particular chapter?
No, I don't think I planned it ahead of time. I think it just it's one of those subplots that developed, and it became a part of it. So I integrated it into the greater outline. So yeah, I mean, so it was heartfelt. It wasn't like logically planned out at all. It was just the character came to light because this character that becomes his ghost girlfriend, she appears earlier in the book as an entity that's been possessing this girl, and it's pretty bad possessions because it's the child acts violent. The family refused to relocate the corpse, and of course everybody believes that it's demon possession, and they don't realize that it's a wandering ghost not far from its corpse. So if a possession is violent, then Martin will just recommend the exhumation of the corpse and move it somewhere else away from children. But they don't want him to because it's within a wall. And what happened was her husband murdered her and then pushed her down a shaft and then boarded the wall up. And then years and years passed, and so she was known as Shaft Lady. They refused to take her out of the house, but the possessions kept going on, and it was ruining the Exorcist reputation. They were using it against him. And so he grabbed a giant hammer and bashed in the wall and pulled out the corpse of the Shaft Lady and basically buried it in front of his own parsonage behind the church in the Graveyard Lane, for which the title is named. And he visits her one night, and then he visits her again, and then next thing you know, they're an item.
Huh. Very, very interesting. Because I've read many a book where the description of the book, contains explicit descriptions of sex. So you can, expect, lots of descriptive sentences about the acts of lovemaking. And I have to say that would be rather interesting to see how that would unfold. A live person and a ghost, how it would be written. That would be very interesting.
Along the Graveyard Lane by S.M. Dotson. Now available on Amazon. Exorcist Martin Salzburg speaks to the dead, discovers life after death, but becomes a heretic of his own faith in the process. In a race against time, tuberculosis could kill him before he learns how Seymour Downcross is keeping himself and his loyal followers alive since the 17th century. Along the Graveyard Lane. A quest for forbidden knowledge that will change the way you think about the afterlife.
Today we'll be discussing magic, the building blocks of magic, and how it relates to fiction. Today we are sitting down with S.M. Dotson, who recently published his very first novel, Along the Graveyard Lane, Soul Matter Series 1. Steve, could you briefly tell us about some of the magic systems that you have in your book, Along the Graveyard Lane?
The magic in Along the Graveyard Lane is mainly based on communication with the dead, visiting the memories of the deceased, possession, and exorcism. So very much paranormal, classic, supernatural themes. It's restricted me in a way. I can't create classical spells necessarily. So I've got to work within the constraints of an exorcist who is the main character.
Your novels don't necessarily contain balls of flame, cloaks of invisibility, stuff of that nature. It's more, shall we say, dimensional magic. In that you're tapping into a source that's outside your immediate environment.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's not so much an external thing. The spells don't necessarily manipulate the material world. Of course, in this novel, the ghost is the soul, and the ghost and the soul are the same thing. And the soul resides with the body after death. It's called the locus. Locus. The body is the dead body. The corpse is the locus. And the soul stays very near there. And during a full moon, for some reason, the silvery, thin light of the full moon draws the dead out of their own locus. And they wander closer to the surface. So the people with the ability to see the dead, that's why they see them more on a full moon. So in a way, I'm using the magic system to explain common superstitions, to make common superstitions not a soft, but a hard system. There are ways of explaining the vision of ghosts, or why a ghost might possess someone, or why troubled ghosts tend to be the ghosts that people see, and not ghosts at peace. So why is it you don't see ghosts wandering around who are at peace? Well, I explain that in the novel. It's just like exploring common superstitions, and, if you can create a magic system that substantiates those superstitions, well, then you have a pretty good system of hard magic. But of course, with this first book, you're only really looking at one limited view of soul magic, of ether magic, and that is possession and exorcism and communication with the dead. And body jumping eventually. We get into body jumping pretty early on in the novel. The main character is like, how is this guy staying alive since the 17th century? It's like a mystery that has to be solved. And he's slowly dying of tuberculosis, so it kind of motivates him to figure out how this guy is doing that.
You use the term locus. What do you mean by locus in your novel?
A locus is basically like a focal point, is where something is focused. Sometimes when you're writing, you pick a term out of several simply because it sounds better. So locus, to me, sounded better than location, magnet.
Yeah, beacon, starting point.
Beacon. So let me turn the question on you.
Okay.
James, out of all the fiction you've read and all the magic systems you've encountered, what's one of the notable magic systems that you really enjoy?
I guess my first influence would be Terry Brooks.
He kind of writes fantasy, very Tolkien-esque. A lot of use of elves, of course, wood elves and high elves, and they use the chosen one trope a lot. What did you like about Terry Brooks' magic system?
Terry Brooks was sort of my training wheel. then I stopped reading fantasy for a long time because it just kind of got old. So I guess for me, sometimes it's kind of like when an author is able to reinvent the wheel, if you will, present the magic or the magic system in a completely new, revolutionary way, where you're like, whoa, that is cool. And as an example, Roger Zelazny, when he wrote the Amber series. It seemed very simple, but up until that point, I never realized how awesome and how different his magic system was compared to, say, Terry Brooks.
And this is the Amber series, of course, that you're talking about. And they had a diceless role-playing game for a little while. Go ahead and describe Zelazny's system and the idea of the tarot. And
you have to understand that the Amber series was based on a royal family. And the royal family was always fighting to be the king and or queen of Amber. And Amber is the opposite reflection of what we would call Earth. And Amber was considered to be more superior than Earth.
Amber is like the center of the multiverse.
Yeah.
All the other worlds, including our own, are thousands and millions of different variations of all these different worlds that run parallel to each other in some ways.
Yeah, what Zelazny called shadows. They're just shadows.
Shadow, yeah. You could walk through shadow and go to these different variations of world. And it's what's interesting is this magic or whatever it is, the royal family that Jim mentioned, they're like basically the only ones who can use it, or at least they're the only ones that the novel focuses on that can use it, you know?
Yeah, and as far as what you mentioned, the trump card, it's basically a tarot, and the tarot trump are portraits of the royal family, and they're able to reach out with their mind through, I guess you call the trump card would be the conduit. It's sort of like teleportation / telepathy.
Yeah, it's like basically a form of medieval sigil magic where you create a symbol and then you can talk to that specific entity.
Yes. And what's even cooler is that you can actually bring that person, no matter where they are in the universe, you can bring that person to you. You actually, quote unquote, clasp hands through the trump card and bring the person to where you're at. That was kind of cool. The family were considered Amberites, and Amberites were like they had superior strength, they had superior, physical characteristics, physical attributes, and they also had the ability to create their own world. And they used to be able, they do what they call shadow shifting or shadow walking. It's a process where they're actually walking wherever they're at, they're walking, and in the process of walking, they are basically changing the environment around them. It's like it's a constant shaping of the environment. So they're basically shaping the environment as they walk. In the process of their shaping, okay, there's a plant there. Okay, and now there's a cactus there. And now there's a sun high in the sky, and all of this is, to an end point, and that is to, this new world that they have created. And they're basically domain in that world. If you love magic and you love magic systems, Amber, the Amber series by Roger Zelazny is one of my must-read books, series, because it takes magic and basically puts it on its head, because it's so different.
That's just such a great idea. So neat. Really an inventive mind.
Yeah, I mean, in some instances, these Amberites are able to basically suspend time. So let's say, for example, one Amberite gets injured really bad, and they know if they don't get help soon that they're gonna die. So they get the help they need, but they need time to recuperate, to heal. It's a time-sensitive matter. So what they do is they create a world where time slows down. So in their world where they create, for every 30 days on that new world that they create, where they're recuperating and healing, is equivalent to 1 day in Amber.
Yeah, that's cool. A time bubble.
Yeah, and that's just really cool. And then they come back, and it's almost like they never left in the first place, and they're completely healed, they're recuperated. And then, of course, Stephen King's Dark Tower series, well, not just the Dark Tower series, Stephen King kind of started doing that in the early days of his writing, where he's able to connect all of his novels in such a way where they kind of overlap one another.
And it's the Dark Tower that really, I think, gives you the most information, the backbone of all the magic, because basically, like, you've got these sitcoms coming out that are based on the Stephen King universe, and they're not even written by Stephen King. You know, you got the Castle Rock seasons that are like, there are 2 of them out now. We just finished the second one, which is based off his Misery book, and the first one, which I don't know what it was based off of, but it was really good. But it's like, because I'm familiar with the Dark Tower, I feel like I understand what's going on instead of other people in the room that are watching the same show, especially when we talk about it afterward. There were like 2 different dimensions, and this is what Stephen King does. There's different worlds, but they're all connected by doors. Like in Castle Rock, for example, season 1, there's this little area in the forest, and weird things happen there. Once you start getting into, spoiler alert, once you start getting into that first season, you realize that every once in a while you meet your doppelganger from another dimension. There are multiple versions of you. And Stephen King goes into more depth in this in the Dark Tower series, the multiple versions idea, and the different connections that people make with each other and that sort of thing. You know, in the Castle Rock series, it's like there's this, it's like there's a weird buzzing sound, and I'm like, I know what that is from the fucking Dark Tower series. That's the thinny. When you hear that weird buzzing sound, almost like electricity, it's like it travels through the arc in the air. Well, see, in the Dark Tower series, Stephen King explains that's where the cracks are forming, and they all lead to the Dark Tower in the middle, the singularity, almost like amber in a way, because amber is kind of the middle of them all. And all these cracks that are forming are creating cracks between the worlds. So it's like the Castle Rock series, you can totally explain it with that sort of magic system, this multiverse magic system. So Jim, explain some of the magic that you've encountered in the Dark Tower series, especially with the Man in Black, right? Because he's really the one who actually has that ability. Not many people can perform magic, straight magic in the Stephen King world. It's just more like infrastructure type magic, how the world works sort of thing.
It's been a while since I've read the Dark Tower series in beginning to end, and I think I've done that 5 times now. I've reread the Dark Tower series about 4 or 5 times now.
Oh, geez. Now, I've read The Gunslinger and The Drawing of the Three, the second one, and I've read The Wasteland, number 3, and I've read number 4. I listened to number 4, The Wizard in Glass, and loved it. That's my favorite one, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to read them all again to really for sure, but Wizard in Glass was so good. Well, like, what were some of the things that the main antagonist, Randall Flagg, could use? What could he do? He could, like, hypnotize people, right?
Yeah, enchantment.
So could the protagonist, Roland, in the Dark Tower series. He could hypnotize people, too. And there were demons. There were, like, special areas that, like where, what was her name, Susan or Susanna, where she became possessed by the demon?
The first time you notice maybe there's some magical properties about Roland the Gunslinger is his ability to spin that bullet from knuckle to knuckle on his hand. He would do it because that would be how he would put someone into a trance. Now, would you consider that magic? Being able to put someone in a trance?
Not really.
Maybe on a very, very lower level, maybe. But most of the characters, from what I gather, weren't necessarily magical themselves so much as the world that they were in was sort of magical. Yeah,
it's the world, it's the properties of the world, and some people are more sensitive to it than others. And like the boy Jake, for example, for some reason he attracted doors to other dimensions for some reason.
Yeah, and he almost lost his freaking mind trying to find a certain door.
My theory is that the reason the boy was so strong is because other versions of him in other dimensions had died. All that sort of like magic went to the one boy, Jake. The one version of Jake in that one world. Or it's been a long time. I might remake that theory. It depends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was one statement that sort of encapsulates what the Dark Tower series is, and that is towards the end of the Gunslinger, where Roland has a chance to save Jake from falling to his death. And of course, if Roland were to save him, he would probably end up dying himself. So he had the choice to make. Was it to save the boy or to continue his quest to find the Dark Tower. And of course, he shows the Dark Tower. And as Jake is falling to his death, Jake says, kind of screams it, "Go then! There are other worlds than these." I think most of the characters are not possessed with anything magical. It's just more so that where they're at, the world that they're in is sort of magical. And the key element is, of course, the cracks in our universe. Things are getting slippery, it's almost like a tectonic plate when an earthquake happened. The plates rub against each other to a point where it causes friction and something opens up. But yeah, there are a lot of parallels between the Dark Tower and all the other books that he has written. And I don't think you would necessarily realize that unless you read the Dark Tower. And the Dark Tower is sort of like
ties it all together, yeah. Like, Zelazny and Stephen King both are interesting. They really remove it from the fantasy element in many ways. And I think one example of someone who is innovative but stays within the fantasy genre is Brandon Sanderson. He creates the Mistborn series. And I've read listened to one novel, audiobook, and his magic system is really interesting. It's based off metals. Well, there are several magic systems, but the main one that was in this particular book, it's based off metal magic. And there are these vials and this sort of a liquid base that these different metals are infused in this liquid, and you consume it. So, and different metals give you different abilities, And you can do things like send metal through the air, like a bullet you can send through the air, but it's not from a gun. And you can also go really high into the air by pushing off against the metal beneath you. And so you can take a coin and throw it on the ground and then push off of it basically with your magic, and you'll go really high into the air. And so it's really innovative.
Yeah, one point I wanted to elucidate on the difference between Terry Brooks and Roger Zelazny as it relates to why I started to get away from Terry Brooks's magic system and how I was infatuated and still am to this day with the Roger Zelazny magic system is, for the most part, it seems like magic just came so easy to all the little elves and Terry Brooks. And I'm not saying anything derogatory. It is what it is, That's just the way he created everything. Everybody seemed to kind of, they were born with magic. Oh wow, hey, I can do this. There's a lot of magic, and it got old. And the one thing I appreciated about the Zelazny magic system is that even though they were amberite, they had to do what they had to hang a spell. They actually had to construct the spell before they could use it. So oftentimes before they go into battle, they would take a moment of meditation, if you will, while they're preparing for battle or a quest or whatever. And they would work on, okay, I think I'm going to need this spell, this spell, this spell, and this spell. And they would, basically construct the spell. They would, quote, hang the spell. And what it basically means that the spell is hanging there waiting to be used. And with a certain invocation of a word or a phrase, the spell would be released. I like that because you had to work at the magic. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense? It wasn't easy. You had to actually work. There was more of a realism I felt with the Zelazny magic system, because it did take a toll on you.
In a magic system, the more restrictions in a way, the better. Or a reasonable amount of restrictions, Don't make your magic system like an anything goes thing. Make it a specific thing, or if it is something overt like fireballs or the ability to control lightning from the sky or what have you, make it take a toll, or make it cost a lot. Make it to where you have to construct the spell ahead of time. It's not just an inexhaustible well of magic that someone can bubble up. It almost makes it too easy,
Yeah, make sure you put a risk versus reward. Okay, there's going to be a risk if I do this, but the reward would be this.
Yeah, you got to have the risk-reward thing going on. Yeah. But most novels, by the end, there's at least a simulated risk, One of the problems with conventional tropes, like in fantasy, like with The Chosen One, most of the time, you pretty much know the Chosen One's going to make it happen. It's going to reach the end,
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, okay, you've really got to put some risk in there. And it's like Tolkien did that in a way because Frodo was the ring bearer, and in a way that he was the chosen one, not necessarily like by prophecy or destiny, but chosen by the council of, elder and dwarves and humans. Transport the ring, and it's like it paid a big toll on him by the end. It was almost like the magic of the ring messed him up a little bit, almost like it did with Bilbo, the one who had the ring before him. He became more of a shell of himself, and to become, somewhat forlorn and empty, and it's almost like a big addiction of some sort. It's like once the ring is taken from you, you'll always feel that hollow that it carved out for itself.
That's the beauty of the magic. You can make whatever you want. You can set your own rules, you can set your own guidelines, you can set your own restrictions. And I think what's important, even though you have that, I think the danger for a lot of authors is to get sucked into that same recipe over and over and over, where you're basically rewriting the same script. And unless you're a phenomenal author, you're not really going to get away with it without thinking, oh yeah, this sounds like books, this sounds like Tolkien, this sounds like, So I think the key for any author is to take an idea and, reinvent the wheel, but do it in such a way where it's completely unique. And that's where Zelazny will always hold a special place in my heart, because he was able to do that. He was able to set a new precedence, if you will, with his magic system. And then, of course, Stephen King did so with his Dark Tower series. So for any authors out there who are trying to aspire to be a magic writer, fantasy or gothic or occult, focus on making something completely new, unique. Because I think you'll have a better audience, because I think history shows, even in sitcoms on TV, how long does a normal sitcom run? Maybe 8-9 years before it gets old. And it takes a new screenwriter and a new director and a new producer to come up with a completely new idea. And then that catches on. And then another 8-9 years and that goes away. So that brings me to Mr. Dodson here, who's able to do that with his first book, Along the Graveyard Lane, where he's able to take an age-old idea, if you will, and he put a completely new, unique spin on it. So this leads us to a few questions that's more specific to your novel, Along the Graveyard Lane. You mentioned possession and exorcism. Just how does exorcism work in your novel?
I wanted something that featured an exorcist in these early novels. I love the novel and the movie, The Exorcist. I like that occult, dark edge. So it automatically gives that protagonist that dark air, of mystery. So he's a late 19th century exorcist, trained in Berlin. He moved to a small town in France called Putressa. And childhood possession is rampant. And so every full moon, a pretty good amount of children will become possessed by a wandering spirit. And there are all these exorcists, mainly in big cities. And if the possession is especially bad, a family in a smaller town will try to call a local priest to help out, maybe do some prayers or what have you. And usually the invading spirit goes away with the coming of the sun. So it's usually in especially bad cases will somebody hire an exorcist. And so Martin is hired by this Lutheran church in this small town. And the Lutheran church is actually quite wealthy because there's some wealthy donors in the area. And so a town the size of Putressa usually doesn't have their own exorcists. They usually have freelance exorcists that come in during the full moon and make some good money by praying over the possessed child. But now they have a professional exorcist, at least the Protestants do, even though he'll help out Catholics too, but they usually don't want like a Lutheran exorcist in their house. They'd have to explain to their neighbor why the traitor of the faith is in their residence. And so Martin goes to this small town, and the exorcism in my novels, like most exorcists in Europe, it's pretty much what they really actually do in real life. They perform the standard exorcismus ritualis, and there's usually specific Bible verses. There's this thing called the Exorcist Code, and you're forbidden to actually have a conversation with the demon that is possessing the child. And in conventional Christian belief, they basically say, if a child's possessed, it's a demon possession, right? So what Martin discovers is that it's actually wandering ghosts during the full moon that possess children. And he has a dialogue with the foreign host, and what he discovered is that he can have a dialogue with the invading ghost And basically by asking it questions and getting its name and kind of helping it come to the realization that it has already died and it has become trapped in a child's body, they often go away before the dawn. And so it's a highly successful method of exorcism. But Martin has to hide this truth because he'll get his license taken away and be considered a heretic if he tells people that he's been having these conversations with the invading spirit. But it's the conversation itself that helps, like it's called suke therapy, like Freud's psychotherapy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I call it suke therapy, and it's like a soul therapy. They're based on the same root words, of course. You just have a dialogue with the soul. And if the invading ghost is really malignant, like if it's really evil and it's caught in its own memories and it just wants to hurt things and it's hurting the child because it's so erratic and violent, and Martin can't actually exorcise the spirit, then what he does is he, of course with the permission of the family, he locates the corpse near the possession, the locus where the ghost lives, and he exhumes the corpse and relocates it so it cannot possess the child the next full moon, because it's a violent spirit, you know. And so in this magic world, all these wandering ghosts, they actually don't wander very far from their own corpse, and it's the corpse that sort of like is like the magnet that stores the soul until that full moon comes out. And especially if a ghost doesn't realize that it's dead, it's still wandering around or trying to figure out how to wake up, it'll basically come alive during the full moon in a child's body and like flail about and try to control its speech mechanism, and parents will of course be really scared because they think that it's a demon possession, you know. So Martin has to hide this truth, but his method's really successful. In a way, the reader, along with Martin, goes through this process of learning how to basically lie to people, but at the same time discover what is really happening with this rampant childhood possession that's going on.
So if I understand it, everybody thinks that a possession is being done by a demon, and that's where the no-no comes in. You're not supposed to communicate to a demon, but in actuality, it's just a ghost that's possessing the child.
Yeah.
So if they knew,
and often on accident.
Well, if they knew that it was actually a ghost and not a demon, how would that change the landscape of your novel?
If it's a demon that is possessing the child and the church provides the exorcist, they can basically substantiate their role in the life of the community. If people believe that it's a demon possession and they're using the word of Christ to banish the demon, then that sort of gives them a stronger hold in the community. Especially in the novel, I explain, after the Enlightenment happened, the church really needed to find a way to stay strong with all these people who were, leaving the church. And in my alternate history, that was considered basically the lost sacrament. Exorcism is where these exorcists, they keep the faith of the community strong if they're out there banishing demons. If they're just ghosts that happen to be wandering around, then the church doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it, because the people aren't as afraid unless it's a real malignant spirit. So it's basically maintain the lie, and increase the faith of the community. So basically, Catholics are guilty of it, Protestants are guilty of it, the demonization of ghosts, basically. And the community as well, is because the community has to accept that superstition. And so whenever a ghost possesses a child, when the child is like acting weird and speaking in a different language and undulating slightly, that's just the ghost trying to take control of the child in this soul matter world. So it's actually really easy to think that it's some weird, strange, otherworldly, or at least demonic foreign entity inside the child. So made it the Christian religion the state religion. He also banished pagan religions. And what Christianity would do is they would make a demon out of the gods of other religions. They say if you really do speak to the god of another faith, then it's actually a demon trying to fool you.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also do that with ghosts, And the Christians even say this today to their children. And in particular, I met this woman recently at a coffee house who told me that she's a Catholic, and Catholics strongly admonish against speaking to ghosts, because if you're speaking to a ghost, it's really a demon, they say, trying to fool you, If your grandmother comes to you in a dream, it's really a demon trying to trick you, so don't ever speak to or communicate with or do anything a ghost says, because it's a demon. And so that's a common Christian thing to do. So it's not very far-fetched, you know.
Sounds like a monopoly.
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't that the whole idea of the Reformation, is the Roman Catholic Church is now losing its monopoly. And for so long, so unbelievably long, the Roman Catholic Church did have a monopoly, and they would stomp out any other heretic, they would call it, any other variation of the faith. Hell, they'd go in and slaughter an entire city that began worshiping a slightly different version of Christianity. You know, it was a big deal in 325 AD when Constantine brought together all those bishops from all over Europe and declared that Arianism, a sort of alternate Christian faith, was incorrect. Like the idea of the Trinity we have now was solidified at that time under Constantine with all those bishops. Because like a lot of the Germans across from the Danube were Arian Christians, and Constantine most likely wanted a unified Christianity, because that way, you know, you could keep the empire stronger if it's one religion. And the emperor right after him, Theodosius, you know, it's real obvious that he agreed with that idea. But yeah, Constantine and all those bishops, all those Christian bishops were like, no, Arianism is wrong. Arianism believed that God created Jesus. But the common belief with Catholics and even Protestants is that of the Trinity, is that Christ always existed, and so did the Holy Spirit, 3 in 1 sort of idea. I don't remember the original question, but that was some information. Oh, the original question. The original question was, like, why in the world would you create a novel where, you know, the church is trying to demonize ghosts and say that sometimes ghosts possess children, but they're actually demons? Why would the church do that? Well, because they do that sort of thing. They really do. They have done it in the past. And it's real easy to believe, because you scare somebody enough and they're going to...
Yeah.
Superstitions are scare people, you know. Don't walk under a ladder. You'll get bad luck. Don't break a mirror. 7 years bad luck. Don't pick up a dime with the head face up, or bad luck will come.
Yeah, you know, it's like in the world of church and religion, there's only one shop to stop. It's still amazing, though, 2,000 years later, that we haven't been able to globally have one religion where everybody is in agreement.
Are you in favor of a one-world religion?
This should like open up a can of worms here. Maybe in a way, if it somehow allows us to stop bickering about religion and all of the strife that occurs from, you know, well, our religion's the right one and yours is not, and all this, you know, it's just, it would be nice to have a common ground, you know, where we all kind of have the same thought, assuming that, of course, you believe that there is a higher power to begin with. Of course, that's another can of worms.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it's true. It would be better if there weren't, like, major world religions in conflict with each other. It's just like certain religions are basically booby-trapped by their own ancient doctrines to hate certain other existing religions. And it's like, there's no way out of it unless you give up your religion or just give a monopoly to one particular religion. If you're like me and you don't follow a religion... I mean, my basic idea about God is, like, if there really is a God, I'm not saying there isn't, but it's for a little while, but hopefully your brain moves out of those old pain. That it's not because I fear hell or really want to go to heaven and get some virgins that I act good. No, it's something higher than that. Religion always says, you know, higher ethics, higher morality, where it's like they're kind of the lowest in the way. If the reason that a Christian is moral, aside from Jesus telling them to be nice to each other, it's the fear of hell and the want for a good afterlife. Let's just be honest. That's the base of it. You fear hell, so don't act bad, you know? And some people will say, and they're probably correct, some people need that fear. Some people are like, need to be scared into not fucking stealing and killing and raping, you know? So it's like, should we get rid of religion? Well, no. For some reason, I've settled on this number, but I'm always okay with, like, the 15%. If there's 15% of the population that lives beyond religion and has a humanitarian bent, an understanding beyond heaven or hell of why we should be moral, then that's probably the way it's going to be with humans, you know? Religion's always going to be there. It's too bad that we have religions that are booby-trapped to hate each other, though. That's pretty messed up. We have 3 religions that have a similar Holy Land, you know, and it puts them at perpetual odds, even though Christianity and Israel like to team up. There's Islam there in the neighborhood, so it's like, Perpetual war.
Yeah, and it sucks that each religion thinks they have a monopoly on what they think is right and what they think is wrong. You can't get out of that. But I mean, you see it all over the place. You know, different races, different political persuasion, different religions. You know, and it's just it's almost like, well, when we continue to have a division in a particular thought or persuasion, then obviously, yeah, there's going to be a friction. So, is your main character, Martin, is he in a way maybe an antichrist?
Like big A Antichrist? No. He never becomes anti-Christ, but since he does have a conflict with conventional religion, he starts to crack and question other aspects of his religion. But I just think it's kind of entertaining to play with those ideas and think about the idea of the soul. I don't necessarily believe that we have a soul. I have no way of knowing. I have many ways of assuming, but no way of knowing. Especially in fiction, when you tease it out. When you start teasing out certain superstitions, I think that's when it gets really interesting.
We have been talking about magic systems, and the whole religious monopoly in of itself is a very interesting and rather entertaining magic system in its own right. If you look at all the scriptures and all the books that have been written, whether it's the Old Testament, the New Testament, you know, some could argue that there's a lot of magic going on in there, a whole lot of magic. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk about your newest novel, your very first published novel, Along the Graveyard Lane, and you can find that on Amazon. Kindle and paperback versions are available, so be sure to go to Amazon.com, do a search on S.M. Dotson, Along the Graveyard Lane, The Demonization of Ghosts, Soul Matter Series 1. Be sure to leave your comments, what you think about this discussion, and if you don't agree with what we say, hey, as Jake said, go then, there are other worlds than these.
Very well said, James. And Stephen King.
Oh yeah. Stephen King's over like, hey, give me credit, goddammit.
Yeah, like he's ever needs to say that.
Yeah.
Along the Graveyard Lane by S.M. Dotson. Now available on Amazon. Exorcist Martin Salzburg speaks to the dead, discovers life after death, but becomes a heretic of his own faith in the process. In a race against time, tuberculosis could kill him before he learns how Seymour Downcross is keeping himself and his loyal followers alive since the 17th century. Along the Graveyard Lane. A quest for forbidden knowledge that will change the way you think about the afterlife.